Hey everyone, in this video I'm going to cover unattended upgrades. The unattended upgrades package lets you automate updates. And so the first thing we need to do is install the package. Correct that there. And it's unattended-upgrades. Once we're all set with installing that, we can take a look at our configuration file. It's an etc apt, apt.conf.d, 50 unattended-upgrades. We'll take a look at that shortly, but we also need to put another configuration file in place before unintended upgrades will actually update metadata or install updates. And so there's a couple ways we can do this. We can either run a dpackage command to create the configuration files for us, or we could just copy the settings over to the appropriate file from the Debian wiki. So I'll go ahead and just run the dpackage command. And we'll just say yes there. And we'll take a look at that configuration file. And that's an etc apt, apps.conf.d, 20 auto-upgrades. And so the first setting is an automated way that we compare to running apt update. And then the second is like running apt upgrade. And so with these settings in place, now that the upgrade can work automatically, we can go ahead and take a look at our configuration file here. And there are a lot of options here that can be adjusted or enabled. We'll go ahead and take a look at some of those and some of the ones I think we'll be most interested in. There are definitely other options you can learn about, and feel free to, anything you have questions about, go ahead and leave me a comment if you'd like additional help. Here we have a pretty good explanation of some of the settings we can adjust and how we might set up things like, for example, the first thing we see is an explanation of how we would set up our origins, which is going to identify the repositories that we're going to allow unattended upgrades to install from, as well as some example default values that we can just uncomment, and those settings will be applied for us after we save the changes to the file. And so if we take a look here at the unattended upgrade origins here, we can see some things populated here, but we'll have to make some tweaks if we want to include all configured repositories. So if you want to apply regular updates or any third-party repositories that you've added, then you'll want to add these here. And so we can do a manual run of unattended upgrades with the debug option. And that'll give us information about the actions being performed so that we can review that and make adjustments and troubleshoot issues. We can also just use the dry run flag, and that way we won't actually apply any updates or take any actions. It's just a run of what would happen if we ran the command with current configuration. And so to start, I'm just going to go ahead and demo that and show what we get when we do a dry run with this initial config. And so we get quite a bit of output, but what we're interested in is actually at the top here. We'll look at is that we get some information right here about what is actually allowed and enabled. So here we can see what we have that's marked as allowed. I'll just point out real quick here, we also have a section where if we blacklisted packages, which I'll talk about shortly, those would be listed here. And then we have some information about items that are not allowed in our origins. So we can see here that we have things related to our LibreWolf repository, which we added in the previous video. And we also have things related to stable updates, regular updates. There is information about how we can configure that in the file and some examples, but we can also look at app policy, which we talked about briefly in the previous video when we talked high level about apt pinning. So if we go ahead and take a look at app policy, you can see that the format of these is very similar to what we have in the unattended upgrades configuration file. You can always come here after you've added a repository and take a look at this if you need some extra help with configuring that and build the entry based on the output of app policy. And so I'm going to go ahead and go back into our configuration file here. And head back to the origins section. So actually what we need in order to get those regular updates, uncomment here. And then I've gone ahead and taken our LibreWolf repository and formatted it so that it is using the full keyword name. So we have it in that format there. And so we'll go ahead and save this and actually do another dry run in debug mode so that we can check out our output here. Now we don't have any information about the origins that are not allowed. And in here, we can see that we have our LibreWolf repository, and we can also see that we have our bookworm updates repository or origin. So I just want to make a brief mention here about applying the unattended updates, and there are some warnings about applying more than security updates and the things that can go wrong. You know, sometimes people advise against it. I would say that's probably more in the server world, and if you're running something critical, then that's going to change kind of the nuance of how you would automatically apply updates and what you would choose to avoid updating when you can, except when there are critical security issues and things of that nature. But in the case of, say, your desktop or your personal laptop, I think that's pretty minimal as far as the issues go. And as long as you have good backups or you can read through the documentation, you can usually fix the problem as long as you haven't done anything crazy like pinning where you've included multiple releases and mixed and matched testing and stable and unstable. And just one thing to mention there real quick, but generally like I said, I don't have too many problems, and so this should be fine. And so if we jump back to our configuration file, I just want to run through a couple more items. And so here's our blacklist, and there are instructions on how we could do matching and add expressions, or we could just be explicit with the packages we want to add. And so I'm not going to demonstrate this here. I think the examples are clear enough. But this is where you would add items that you don't want attended upgrades to apply to. And also we have some mail options where we can send information about either errors or we can have it send information about the changes of whatever was applied when it ran. You would have to install mail tools to get that working. I'm not going to configure it and demonstrate it here because I will be actually covering mail related topics and different packages related to mail in future videos. And so we also have the option to remove kernel related packages when they are no longer in use. And usually I'll do this when I have run updates, and then I will run the auto remove command, and that will get rid of these extra packages. In this case, I'm going to turn this on for our demo. And so now we're all set there. And I'm also going to turn on the option to remove unused dependencies. And so we have some configuration here that will allow us to manage rebooting the system. And of course, that's all kind of self-explanatory, but I'll run through it real quick, is that we can just automatically reboot after updates are applied. We can adjust the options to reboot whether a user's logged in or not. And of course, we can also time our automatic reboots. We can also make some logging adjustments. And so by default, it logs to its own files. We can make adjustments to send this to syslog, or we can have it logged to journal.ctl so that shows up in there. We can also change the verbosity of the logging and turn that up. By default, it is not using verbose logging. We have an option that allows us to suppress unattended upgrades when we are running on battery power, and that will require another package to be installed, and that's powermgmt-base. And so actually, before we wrap that up, I do want to mention that this logs to its own directory. That's var log unattended upgrades. And so now that we have that configuration in place, I'm going to cover how we can set a schedule for this to run on. And I'm only going to cover the settings that I mentioned here as part of the example. It's not a full explanation of systemd timers. I plan on covering systemd and its subtopics more thoroughly in future videos. So to start, we need to adjust the apt-daily.timer. And this timer controls updating package metadata. So the way I'm going to configure this, just for this example, is to run it once per day. And so we can do that with this command. This section is blank, and so this is what I've added behind the scenes. And you can also see our information here stating that anything in this section between these lines is going to be the contents of that override.conf file. And so a quick run through of what we have configured here is I have my declaration of timer. And then I have on calendar here with no value. And that's because we have a default value already set, and timers are actually cumulative, so we would have multiple schedules set. So in this case, I'm going to set this to run every day at 5 o'clock. And so the format of this actually goes year, month, day. And this isn't a complete example, like I said, of all possible time combinations. This is just what I have set up for this example, just to repeat that. And then we have our randomized delay, and that's so that you don't have a bunch of things firing off at once. So you could set it whatever you want there as far as how much time it will randomly choose within that interval. So if I put 300 here within a 5-minute random interval of the time that is triggered to fire, it will actually go off. And so once we're satisfied with that, we can write our file. And then the timer needs to be restarted with systemctl command to apply the changes. And then once we've restarted it, we can run a status command so that we can see what our trigger looks like. And so that looks correct to me. That looks like what I wanted. So we're all set there. And so to wrap up, I'll also set the schedule for actually upgrading the packages. I set these up kind of arbitrarily just for demonstration. You can set this up to run on a schedule that works best for you. Maybe you're really security conscious and using a more cautious configuration, applying only security updates on a daily or maybe weekly basis, and then manually applying other updates every couple weeks or whatever you prefer for your system. And so in this case, we're setting the apt-daily-upgrade.timer. And so again, the default needs to be cleared. That way we're only running one timer. And the way I have this set is to run every year, every month on the 15th of the month at midnight, and no randomized delay. And so if we save this file, restart the timer, and check our status. And that looks correct to me, so we're all set there. So I'm going to wrap this video up here, and that will close out the coverage of apt as far as what I've intended to cover for the time being. There are, of course, some other aspects of apt I have in mind to potentially cover. I'm also open to suggestions, so leave me a comment if there are specific details of apt that you'd like to see covered. I also try to reply to questions related to the material covered, so leave me a comment if you're having trouble with something. If you enjoy this content and find it helpful, I really appreciate your support by subscribing to the channel and liking the video. Thanks for watching.